Foundations are the starting point of anything in the world, and that includes leadership as well. In order to ensure you have a grasp of what is expected of you, you better have a solid understanding of the foundations. Even if you are a seasoned leader, a reminder of leadership foundations that you have not strayed away from leading to bossing. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast, episode 85, Leadership Foundations. Root Incorporated CEO, Rich Berens. Welcome one, welcome all to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. It's your Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy. It's great to have you here. It's great to have you, the leader, here with me. And soon, my guest, yet another world-class guest, Rich Berens, the CEO of Root Incorporated. And we have a heck of a conversation about basically leadership foundations. I wasn't sure what I was even going to title this episode when I did the interview. But as I looked at the show notes and the topics that we discussed, I decided that, you know what? It's all about foundations of leadership. So here we go. But before we dive into today's show, got to tell you what this podcast is brought to you by today, and that is my Power Goals program. So if you're struggling with your personal goals out there, if you're not hitting those benchmarks that you set for yourself, such as maybe you were looking for that beach bod. You know, at the time of this launch of the podcast, it's going to be the first week of July 2019, and maybe you're just not there and you don't know why. Or maybe you just don't know what goals to set for yourself. Or maybe you just don't know how to get past some things that keep you from achieving your goals. Well, guess what? I got you covered. The Power Goals program goes through all of that, folks. Goes through how to pick the right goals for you, how you can go about figuring out how you're going to achieve those goals, how to schedule them, cut the fat out, find the time, how to actually execute, stay on track. More importantly, get back on track when you get off, because it all happens to us. And then finally, how to properly reflect to make sure you are making progress. And that 5-step process I take you through using myself as a personal example. So again, if you're interested in the Power Goals program, go to movingforwardleadership.com/power. That's going to bring you to the landing page. Check it out. A few different options there for you, such as grabbing just the worksheets, the main Power Goals program, where you get access to the content, as well as the private Facebook group for the people that are in there working through the program, which is a lifetime, by the way. This is a one-time shot deal. And then finally, if you want to up your ante, if you want some accountability, if you want some coaching, there is that option where I one-on-one coach you, help you, hold you accountable to the goals, to the actions that you set for yourself. Again, folks, it behooves you to check it out. Go to movingforwardleadership.com/power. And it's in the show notes of today's episode if you want to check them out. And you can check out the show notes at movingforwardleadership.com/8585. All right, folks. So as I hinted at, we're talking about foundations, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who you are. We all need to have a solid grasp of the foundations of leadership, right? And my guest today, Rich, he's the CEO and Chief Client Fanatic of Root Incorporated, and has helped align leaders at global 2,000 organizations drive strategic and cultural change at scale, folks. He's a speaker on issues of transformation and how to create lasting change, has authored articles for numerous publications and blogs. Under Rich's leadership, Root has been listed among the Great Places to Work Institute's top 25 places to work, and been named Inc.'s 5,000 fastest growing companies. And the company has experienced 10 years of consecutive growth. So if anyone knows the foundations of leadership, it's definitely Rich. And when I got the request for him to be on a show, I had to jump at it and get him on. And in fact, this episode's been on the books for a heck of a long time, but we made it happen. Before I hit play on it, there is one thing you need to note. Rich is a busy guy. He was on the road when we recorded this. So he's in a hotel. You know how hotel Wi-Fi is. You know how audio quality goes with that. So it's not the best as if it was face to face or him at home. But you know what? The content, which is what matters you, and what I strive to bring to you, the best content possible. Anyway, the content was too good for me not to air this. I've cut other episodes out that have been at this level, but not this one, because you know why? The content was just too killer. Anyway, folks, it's time for you to sit back, relax, enjoy my interview with Rich Berens talking about leadership foundations. Rich, welcome to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. It's great to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
For the audience out there, just to know the dedication between Rich and myself, this interview has literally been on the books for 6 months now.
That is correct. But so, here we are.
Here we are. This is the way it goes. It's the life of a podcaster. It's the life of what we do. But in the end, it's all about getting the job done, and here we are today, right?
That's
so,
right.
Rich,
excited to be here.
One of the first things I like to do is get the guest to give a little background of themselves, Cold Notes version, who they are, how they got to where they are today, and anything interesting or funny. Who knows?
Yeah, I'll try to be funny, Scott, but just a bit of background. So, post school, actually, I tried to be a professional tennis player, right? And so I played over in Europe, and I played just well enough to not make any money. And so I decided to go into banking because I thought, investment banking, be competitive. It should be fun. And I found out that I hated it, right? It seemed to be lacking soul, to be honest. It was kind of all about the money. And so it was kind of a wake up call, trial and error for me. I went back to business school in the U.S. And joined this little startup company in Ohio, of all places, that I really had very little connection to. And they had a passion for connecting people to strategy. Right? It was just a handful of people, and they were on the strategy side in the trend business. And they would the work ultimately we were doing in the beginning. We were working with executive teams, doing offsites and that sort of a thing, right? And really feed them critical information and give them a binder at the end of the day with 80 slides, 100 slides, toast our collective brilliance, right? And we would check back 3 months later on the great work that was done, only to have them kind of blow the dust off the report, right? Saying, oh, I don't know, we did some good thinking and work, but we really didn't do anything, right? And that really had us very frustrated, but also excited, because we saw with most organizations, there's this big gap between leaders and what they're trying to accomplish, the brightest few, and then connecting with the greatest men of your team, whether it's 5, 50, 100, or 5,000, and the disconnect between the ambition and the plan and ultimately the execution. And so I joined that small little company. A few years later, I got the privilege to start running it. And now we're 170 people all over the globe, and I've been running it for the past 10 years. And that's sort of kind of my 2-minute summary of the journey and the path, and a little bit of the history and the birth of the organization.
No, it's really interesting, and you really brought out the first question and the first topic I would like to dive into. And this is this whole ideology of the disconnection between leadership and the teams or the organization, those who are achieving it. And it boggles my mind, because I'm such a proponent for communication, open communication, consistent communication, that this even occurs. So from your experience, from your time working with other organizations, the studies that you've done in the past, where does this come from? How do organizations have such a disconnect between the leadership team and essentially the folks executing at the ground level?
Yeah, good question, Scott. It's really a bunch of different things, right? And at its core, one of the key pieces is that as we grow in experience and as leaders in organizations, we sort of forget what it's like to not know, right? And so as we all become our own experts, there's a cool story. Elizabeth Newton, she was a psychology professor at Stanford, right? And she did like a tapping sort. She did a little experiment. She split people into two groups, and she had one group that she called the tappers, right? And the one group that she called the listeners. And she gave the tappers songs that we would all know. And she said, okay, you guys are here's a set of songs. You're going to tap the rhythm of the song, and the listeners are going to have to guess. We're going to split you into groups. And then she said, okay, how many of you, what percentage of songs do you think the other side will guess? And I said, I don't know, somewhere between 40 and 50%. And it came back that the answer was 2.5%. Right? And so she asked the tappers after, and they were frustrated and surprised. They're like, I couldn't believe it. I was tapping the song and it was so clear in my head. I can't believe they couldn't get it and they didn't understand. Right? And in many ways, as you think about business as a leader, that's often what happens, right? We're wrestling with our business. We're thinking about it all the time. We're having all these narratives in our head. But we then tend to put this in about 15 or 20 slides of some bullet points. We convey that to everybody else, and then we wonder why no one cares, right? We didn't bring them along on a journey. We have this clarity in our head, but we're not conveying it in a meaningful way, and people can't connect to it, and therefore they don't associate with it. They're not engaged, and the canyon starts building, right? And so, we see that all the time. The difference between quote unquote the brightest few and the greatest many, or what's in the heads of the ones in charge, and then in the hearts of the ones who need to execute on it, right? And this is when stuff breaks down all the time. And it's leaders having a lack of self-awareness really around that and not being very good at it.
Yeah, I can understand that, especially probably for those who just kind of join an organization and immediately join a leadership role, not necessarily, climb the ranks through a particular organization, kind of just get hired right in. I can see how you would just lose that touch, right? Or you wouldn't even have it in the first place, that connection in the first place to ensure that you keep connected with your team and keep them informed and take that vision basically out of your brain and communicate it in such a way that it comes clear to everybody else, and most importantly, they get on board. So to follow up with that, what are some advice and that you have for leaders out there to essentially do that? How can they communicate that vision in a manner that immediately draws in the rest of the team so that they're effective?
Yeah, I'm going to take this a couple of different directions, right? And so when we looked back a little while ago on the last sort of 20 years of experiences, and we looked at some blind spots that leaders had, right? The two in particular that pertain here, Scott, is one is on how compelling is your story, and then one is on really how you engage people. And let me go to the engagement one. And maybe just to illustrate through an example, if I talk to a group of folks, Scott, I'll often say, okay, who likes Sudoku, right? And I don't know, half the group will raise their hand. And who likes crossword puzzles? People raise their hand. And then who likes novels? And people raise their hand. By now you get like 95% of the audience have raised their hand. And I'll say, okay, how many of you, when you do that, look at the answer key, right? And, there's always one or two. There's always like, there's always a person or two. But for the most part, people don't look at the answer key, right? And then you say, well, why is that? Well, what do you think people say? When I say, why don't you look at the answer key? Well, how do people reply? How would you reply, Scott? Why don't you look at the answer key for a crossword puzzle, Sudoku, or a novel that you read?
I'm way too stubborn. I will never look at the answer key unless I'm giving up.
That's it. Exactly. I'm going to figure this out, darn it, right? I want to be able to solve this puzzle. I'm smart enough to do this. Let me solve this and play with it. That's exactly right. It can place to our human ambitions. We're sort of wired that way. At least most of us are, right? Now, what do we do with strategy in an organization? Right? Well, we put it in a deck and we tell people, we essentially give them the answer key, and then we wonder why they don't care, right? We don't make them part of the process. And so what I tell you is, if you're a leader listening, whether your team is 3 people, 5 people, or 10 people, you don't create engagement through presentation. You create it through conversation, right? You create it by making them a part of the process, right? And so what are your mechanisms? That doesn't mean strategy is always a democracy, right? Engagement is always a democracy. But what are the ways where you're meaningful engaging people in this process? How do you make them feel like they're part of this puzzle they create connections in a meaningful way, and then they did it with you because they were able to co-think, they were able to co-create, they were able to make the linkages versus you just telling them what to do, in which case we all go into compliance mode, right? It's human nature. And so I can't tell you how many leaders with the best of intentions make that mistake and therefore really kind of create a disconnected and disengaged group of folks or a team.
So what you're saying is essentially engage your people right from the get-go, and maybe even to the point of problem definition.
Yeah, certainly, and meaningfully listen. I can't tell you how many companies we've been with where, we did a session with a bank not too long ago, and we engaged the group in strategy and everything else. I'm not going to get into the details of all that we did, but we did debrief at the end. And one woman, it got real quiet, and she said, I've worked in this place for 15 years, right? And this is the first time somebody meaningfully asked me for my opinion about the business versus just telling me how to do my job. And for that, I really want to say thank you, right? And so the point being is, how well are you really listening to your team? How well are you really understanding where they're coming from? And what kind of opportunity are you giving them to really partake and be a part of the process? And I can't tell you how often leaders don't do that well, and it goes such a long way. But you got to make a conscious effort, right? And it takes time.
It does take time. It takes a long time. And in fact, I would suggest it takes discipline to day in, day out to ensure that you go in and you actually listen to your people. And it's the whole ideology of the problem of you people listening to respond versus listening to understand, right? And all the leaders out there, or the bosses, I like to refer to them as, who listen just to respond and actually not really care about the opinion of the person who's talking to them.
Correct. And now you're really listening, right? Yeah. Or are you just waiting for them to stop talking?
Because that never happens.
That's right. That never happens. So that's really one. And then maybe another one that's connected to this whole piece, and where we sometimes see leaders fall down a bit, often, once again, with the best of intentions or unintentionally, is are you really clear on your story, right? And are you crisp on it? And do people really understand what we're looking to create, right? And so, you got to make them part of it, but you also have a certain level of clarity, and can you articulate it in a compelling way? It's just overseas, actually. I was overseas with a global board of management, right? And we were literally, for 2 days, we were working on the strategy, right? And it's great stuff. And you got all the big consultants in. I mean, they're spending gazillions of dollars. And they're starting to feel pretty good about the deck that they have and the strategy that they have. And I said, okay. And it's like, the company has 14,000 people, something like that, right? And I said, and this is the top 12, 14, forget, doesn't matter. I said, all right, we got an hour and a half left. Let's just assume tomorrow, all of you got 5 minutes in front of the entire employee population, and you can make a compelling case for where we're going as an organization, right? We've spent a gazillion dollars, all this time together. You're going to have to be able to make a compelling case. So go lock yourselves away. I'm going to break you into 4 groups. You're going to come back. You're going to present to the CEO and myself the compelling nature of your story, right? And so they go back, they do their work. This is, people, all kinds of degrees, all kinds of backgrounds, multi-year executives. They come back and they start making their pitch on the story. We're in the middle of the second story, right? They got 5 minutes, and the CEO leans over and he goes, "These are freaking terrible," right? He's like, I wouldn't get out of bed to follow this. This is unemotional, not inspiring. They're listing facts. They're essentially putting up some bullet points on some flip charts. And he's like, this is making me realize we're terrible storytellers, right? And so as a leader, what I'd say to the listening group is, whether your team is, once again, 5, 50, or 100, what's your self-awareness around your storytelling ability, meaning the clarity of the story that you have, but also how good you are at telling it in an authentic way, right? And we all have our own personality in our own way. So what's your own way of telling a story effectively? And there's a real disconnect I've often seen where leaders think they're way better at storytelling than they really are. And it does take practice, right? And so have a sense of self-awareness and then a sense of practice. Because if you are a good storyteller as a leader, I mean, it can make a profound impact for how well you can lead a team or the kind of followership you can create.
I always say is never pass up an opportunity to speak to your people, right? And tell
Absolutely.
us. And that's the whole point of you. Every time that you speak in front of a group, you're actually doing two things. You're actually, one, you're pitching a sale of something, and two, you're practicing. And you're practicing that whole storytelling aspect. And my last job, I was a squadron commander of 200 folks. I had 200 soldiers underneath me, my command. And every day, that's exactly the mentality I walked in to work with. It was like, okay, I'm talking to somebody, and it doesn't matter if it's, my second in command, my right-hand man, or the brand new private who just showed up fresh out of basic level training and is completely wet behind the ears, brand new to the Army. It doesn't matter. It's the exact same, ideology. I'm selling something, and I'm also practicing my storytelling, my public speaking,
That's right.
and how I interact. And one of the big things I find, and what I notice is leaders, they often forget who their audience is.
Absolutely.
And sometimes tied with that, the location of where you're talking to your folks. If you're in a big formal setting, you talk to your people in one way, but if you're just walking around the shop floor, well, you know what? You can talk to them a little bit differently. You can be a little less stringent. But I feel like so many leaders out there, they just forget who their audience is. They go and they think that they're talking to that, senior executive level when you're talking to the janitor. Well, the janitor doesn't care about the stats, figures, and all this jazz. He just cares about how he's, his job. But more importantly, well, how does his job actually relate to the greater organization and what they achieve? And often,
no, Scott, you're spot on. Yeah.
And I often use.
Go ahead, Scott. Yeah.
I often use the example of a restaurant, and people will not go to a restaurant for one of two reasons most of the time. One is crap food, obviously. Doesn't need to. Right?
Yeah.
But
That's a showstopper. Yeah.
Yeah. Right? But the second thing is garbage bathrooms. Right? People will stop going to a restaurant if they walk into a bathroom and it looks like it should, a scene from Saw, one of the Saw movies was filmed there, right? And it's like, well, that the janitor or, whoever takes care of the washrooms in that building is actually achieving success for the organization. But if they actually don't understand that, if they don't get that spoken to them in their terms, they'll never know that they're actually one of the two most important people in the entire company.
No, you're so right. I think know your audience and know your setting. And we talked earlier about sometimes as a leader, you forget what it was like not to know or to be in that position, right? Because you might have been there never or 10 or 15 years ago. And then you speak in terms, sometimes it's like what I feel like when we go to a doctor, right? And they explain stuff to you and you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about, right? Can you translate this for me? And in many ways, if you think about people working for your team or your organization, depending where you sit, it can feel like that, right? And so you have to have a sense of empathy and understanding of where they're at. And it's your job. It's as a leader, you have to think of this as it's not their job to understand you. It's your job to be understandable to them.
Yeah.
Right. That's what the good leader does. Right. And they have empathy for that. And they spend a lot of time really understanding who their audience is and connecting with them so that they can create meaning. Because as a leader, you have to be the meaning maker. Right. Yeah. And that's hard. And that takes a good amount of work, It
does.
There's a cool story, actually, Scott, that I was reading because it takes some work. That there's a story about Martin Luther King about 50 years ago when they had the March on Washington in 1963, right? It's like hundreds of thousands of people coming to Washington. And I thought this was fascinating. And so this was really kind of the birth of the civil rights movement. And they tried to galvanize it. And there's like 2 days of speeches and all that good stuff. And Dr. Martin Luther King was kind of working in a hotel on his speech, and there was like 7-8 pages of policy and really well thought through, and his team was working on it, and he was giving closure in that speech. He was he was closing this thing out and then hopefully galvanizing the movement. Well, when he started speaking, he actually started speaking off of his policy speech, right? And so it's kind of boring, to be honest. It's hot out there. It's hundreds of thousands of people. They're only half paying attention. If this was sort of nowadays, people on their smartphones, the equivalent, right? Back then, they obviously didn't have those. And so then Mahalia Jackson, who was one of the backup singers in kind of his entourage, she says, Martin, stop. Tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream, right? Don't tell him about the policy. And he changes, and he started telling us about the dream, right? And then he connected with his audience in a way that made sense to them, right? It wasn't about policy. It was about the emotion of it. It was about the story of it. It was about the deeper meaning of it. And so the point of being is that guy was probably one of the greatest storytellers and orators of our time. And he was missing his audience at that moment, right? And so as a leader, so the best of us can miss the mark pretty quickly, right? And so how do you make sure as a leader you're always keenly aware of who am I talking to? What's going to really be meaningful to them? How do I best connect with them? And then how do I work my butt off to really make sure I do this in a way that they want to listen to me and that they're excited by it, right? And that takes a lot of work.
No, that's amazing. I did not know that story. That's an amazing story.
Yeah.
I guess
written up in Time magazine a couple of years ago. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
I guess kind of shows that, well, like your point is that the best of us can get disconnected. However, on the other side of that coin is it's never too late to get yourself squared away to connect with your audience.
Absolutely. Yeah, no question about it. It's and you know what? It's amazing how appreciative they will be. You know, once you start trying to meet them where they're at, you know, they're kind of like in battle with you, so to speak, right? In terms of kind of your background, it's like, it's once you start reaching out, it's amazing how they will try to help you.
Oh,
right?
100%.
They kind of move from opposing you to like, dude, you could do this better. Or let me help you. And it becomes a different kind of partnership. And I'm sure you experienced that yourself.
100%. So my thing was when I was commanding that squadron was we were the best squadron in the Canadian Forces. Didn't matter.
Yeah.
Day in, day out. And I was blunt about it, like publicly blunt about it in front of my boss whenever. And it wasn't just in front of my soldiers. It was in front of whoever was that I could get a hold. And I just kept saying it and saying it and saying it. I was like, no, guys, I believe this. We are the best. Hands down. And like,
yeah.
And some people are like, well, do we have problems? Yeah, of course we have problems. Guess what? Every organization has problems, right?
Yep.
But when you get up there and you pitch that whole story, that whole ideology, that you are something and you can resonate with your people and connect with your people, you would be shocked at what they'll do for you. And actually, as we're talking, literally right there next to me, which the audience can't see, is a frame pennant. So that's one of the gifts we get when we leave command is this little, it's from history flag pennant with OC. Well, taped to the back of that is a ginormous farewell card with, close to 200 signatures on there.
Oh, that's cool.
Right.
Yeah.
And
that's meaningful, right? Because that came from the heart and was sincere, and that's because of how you invested in them and how much you cared.
Right. Right. So it's just a good example to me that yes, this actually does work.
Yeah. That's cool. And another thing is you talked about kind of leaders, and we talk about some of the blind spots. And another thing that we found where leaders sometimes get themselves in trouble is if they often have a sense that it is safe to tell the truth around here when people really don't feel that, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's what we found a lot is that leaders will tell us, no, this is a very trusting environment, and people feel comfortable telling the truth around here. And we'll talk to the larger team, and they'll say, well, really, the real truth here is spoken in the hallway, the bathroom, and the water cooler. When we think it's safe. And so, and another thing to think about, if you're just a new leader just starting, or even a more experienced leader, is what we've seen is the best ones. There's always going to be some gossip, right? It's just the nature of the beast, right? You said you had 200 people. I mean, they're going to be talking. It's just the nature of the beast. But
absolutely.
But do you have most of the conversations in the room? or outside of the room. The better teams have most of the conversations in the room. And there's a sense of trust that the truth can be spoken here, and it's safe to do that, right? And as leaders, we have to make sure almost everything we do kind of goes against people feeling comfortable telling. There's going to be hierarchy. There's going to be consequences, and so people, if in doubt, will not speak up. So you as a leader have to constantly reinforce the environment that it is safe to do so, that I want you to do so, that this is something we seek. Because if you don't, over time, it gets away from you, right? And this is something to be really sensitive to. And how do you create environments where it is safe to tell the truth, right? And we find the difference between great leaders and average leaders is the ability to do that.
So just on that whole topic, I like to boomerang back. I got two questions, one after the other. And the boomerang back, one is, what happens for these organizations to have that aspect of trust just not exist or disappear? And then two would be, how can leaders actually instill trust within organizations so that the people are actually telling you the truth and not necessarily what they think you want to hear? Because that's often what I run into.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's a couple of different things. So let's say the truth telling. Why does truth telling not happen, right? And I'll sort of say that there's two sides to it, right? From a kind of call it the leader's side of the coin, and then the team member side of the coin, right? And the team member side of the coin, it's going to be, there's all these thought bubbles we have in our heads as human beings, right? That we're thinking about when, let's say, there's an uncomfortable truth. And one might be, well, if I say this, am I going to be the only one thinking it? Am I going to be the outlier? Will I sound stupid or not, or that I don't care, right? Or maybe even more so, is this kind of a career limiting move, right? So that there's these fears, that there's fear and there's real concerns that get in the way, that stop people. And then on top of that, you add natural hierarchy. Maybe the larger the organization gets, I don't even know people. There's policies and procedures, and all these things start weighing on the ability to tell the truth or the comfort of telling the truth, right? And then on the leader side, as a leader, they might go, well, shoot, aren't I supposed to know the answers? Am I going to look stupid if if they tell me some truth that is a surprise to me, right? And so you get those kinds of emotions. And really, I would say the core thing of what it requires for a leader to really be able to create an environment that fosters the truth is to be vulnerable, right? If people see that you're comfortable maybe not having all the answers, or you're comfortable dealing with bad news, or maybe even bad news that was maybe your fault, right? Or you had a role in it, and you admit to it versus you start sharing the blame with others, So how a leader reacts in those moments is unbelievably powerful in the tone that it sets, right? So do you have a sense of vulnerability as a leader when those things happen? Because if you show that, people start feeling a lot more comfortable, right? When I work with leadership teams, and I often say is, if you're serious about changing the culture around here, it has to start with you. So if you want people to admit to flaws, to imperfection, to insecurities, the things that we should be talking about, if you go first, they will follow. If you don't, they'll play it safe, right? And so if you're leading a team, how do you show your vulnerability? How do you make it safe, right? So that they know it's a safe place to pursue the truth, right? And so this one, more than any, really starts, it's a culture and it's a tone that you set, and it has to start with the top of the house.
I love that. It's quite in line with my mentality of what I call extreme leadership. And basically how I refer to it as, your people are the reason for your success. You're the reason for their failures. Right? And
that's a great way of saying it. Yeah.
So
and by the way, Scott, if you're in an environment, because somebody might go, dude, my environment is so poisonous, right? Like, it's like, I don't even know where to start, right? I mean, there's companies where it's just like, it's like an unmitigating disaster, right? and so you might go, how do we ever even make any progress? Because if I just sort of say, hey, it's good to tell the truth, there's no way people are going to start telling the truth, right? And so So one intermediate step, right? You can almost kind of go in the Middle Ages. Who was the truth teller? Who was the only person who was safe to tell the king anything?
Priest. I assume.
Court jester.
Yeah, court jester. Right? Oh, yeah.
The court jester. And what was the court jester? Court jester was the one guy who gets sort of in a funny way saying, hey, they sort of make fun of the truth. And it was the one way to send the king information was getting your head chopped off, more or less, right? And so if you have a pretty poisonous environment, but you want to do something about it, one could be, okay, you sort of appoint a court jester or a truth teller. Hey, you could filter me that stuff, right? Somebody who can sort of kind of feed information back and forth, who starts making it safer, right? So there's some ways you can play this where you can start creating environments to make it a little bit safer, and then start building some trust over time, and then kind of open it up, right? And so, because we've been in organizations where it's kind of a marginal issue, and then we've been in organizations where literally, I mean, it's the silos, people are hiding out, people are stabbing each other in the back, and just because you have a good meeting doesn't mean you're going to create a culture of truth-telling, vulnerability, and open-mindedness. It takes time, it takes a track record, it takes people seeing true behavior change. And there's no short-term fix on that, right? You can make meaningful progress, but it's a good investment of time, and it's not easy, but it's well worth it.
Yeah. One of the things I also like to do is have, basically some, how to terminology this, trusted agents, basically.
That's absolutely right.
Some people that who are at the ground level that that you can trust, and that when you see them, they'll tell you the actual truth. And I had a number of them, and one guy, I'll sum this story up quick. I immediately latched on to him because my first tour around, the first day I met this guy, I was only supposed to be in his building for a couple of minutes, just get an idea of the work and the resources that we had and the infrastructure and all this jazz. And he took 40 minutes to basically give me a belt-fed machine gun load of his thoughts on the hiring process and and the holes and all this stuff. And immediately people are like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. We should have warned you." I said, "No, this is exactly what I needed." Right. And I knew for the whole years, every time I saw that guy, I knew that whatever he told me was the actual truth.
He was kind of your court jester, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
And he did it in a way. It was funny. Sometimes that first day, there was nothing funny about it.
Now, when he was telling you some of these things, did you start taking action? Did you do things differently? I mean, how did that shape your leadership and your thinking?
Oh yeah, it definitely it definitely put me on the spot to start thinking about fixing that as a priority, is what I could control. A lot of it was outside of my control, but what I could control I was going to fix. But one of the other things, one of the rules I live by is I make no changes for the first 3 months or so, because I need to understand why things are the way they are for the reasons that they are. Because you just walk in and start changing things for the sake of changing things, you could be messing up more than what you realize that you are or you're trying to fix. So.
Good point. So
I didn't really do anything right away, but I definitely dove into it and did my research, and then started making some immediate actions for sure. Once those 3 months were up.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a ton of sense. Right? Which to me is like you had a real sense of curiosity, right? You listened, and you probably and then started looking. Is that accurate? Do I agree with that assessment? And then you were curious, and you were in a learning mode, right? Yep. And then you could take action at the right time, which I think is a really important lesson, that to not get too I mean, sometimes maybe the fire is burning and you got to do something on short notice, but some of the things that you're talking about here is be real curious, be in listening mode, be easily approachable, explore for yourself, and then once you've developed your own sense of conviction, go do something about it.
No, that's exactly that's a great way of summing up my methodology to starting a new job.
Yeah, that's cool. That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, for sure. Rich, man, this interview is like flying through. I didn't realize. I just looked at the time that we've been recording. We're bumping up on actually 40 minutes of record time already.
Holy cow!
I know.
It's good when you're having fun, right? Wow. Okay, but we don't want to bore our listeners with too much insight, right?
Well, yeah, for sure. But before we start winding down, I got one last question for you. Then what are some practical tips, advice for the audience out there as leaders to start, looking for those blind spots that they may have and start identifying them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bunch of different things. I'm going to give you, so one, and the book I got about the blind spots is actually an assessment. So one is that it's free. You can go online. I should have the website. I don't instantly have it in front of me. I can get you the book, but there's a self-assessment that you can take with your team, and that kind of gives you some insights into that. Short of that, now the other thing you can do is if you have the right environment, what I've done before is get your team in a room, right, and actually do an activity, right? And one activity you could do is give everybody some Post-it notes and say, hey, listen, I want to look at the strengths that we have as a team and the strengths that I have as a leader. And then second, I want to look at the opportunity points, right? And because this is about being the best version of ourselves, let's put that up on the wall. Let's affinity group that, and then let's look at the story of our team and how we're leading, right? And it takes some vulnerability to go there, but if you do that, you start getting a pretty good sense, and A, you're celebrating the strengths, and B, you're looking at what are the 2, 3, or 4 areas where I could do better as a leader, or we could do better as a team, or we could do better in how we work together, right? And so that's kind of an informal way to kind of get to the truth. And once you do that, once again, it goes back to the earlier conversation we had, is people will start working with you. We all want to be a part of something larger than ourselves. We want to be part of a winning team, and we want to make a difference, right? And if you just give people a chance to do that as a leader, it's amazing how far they'll travel with you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, love it. Awesome. My man, this is, it's been a great episode. It's been a great interview. Well worth the wait. Before we wrap up here, just, I'll feel, it's your turn. Give yourself a shameless plug. Where can people find a book, learn about your resources, follow you, reach out to you, Root as well?
Yeah, a couple of things real quick. So one, there's a lot of resources on the website. So www.rootinc.com, ROOTINC.com. You find the assessment there, especially in the search tab. If you look for the book is What Are Your Blind Spots? You can get that easiest place is probably Amazon. So what are your blind spots? It's conquering the 5 misconceptions that hold leaders back. We informally talked about a bunch of that, right? And it's just 20 plus years of experience of having been in the field and seeing the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And with lots of practical tips and tricks. So if any of what we talked about sounds interesting or valuable, there's a lot of how-tos in there to kind of dig deeper.
Awesome. For the audience there, easy as always, just go to the show notes for this particular episode. The book will be there. The website will be there. The self-assessment tool will all be there, and as well as Rich's links. Rich, my man, it's been a pleasure. It's been an honor. Thanks for coming out, and it's been a great chat.
Hey, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
All right. If you got to this far, that means you got through that little minor audio quality issue. Not a big deal. So I hope you enjoyed that episode, because I'm pretty sure you did if you're listening to me right now. Awesome guy, Rich. Awesome message that he has, and it was definitely a delight for me to interview him and bring his message to you guys, the listener, the leader. All right, folks, if this episode resonates with you, never forget R²S². Rate and review the show so that I can reach more people out there and I can help more people out there, because that's what I'm here for. I'm here to help leaders become leaders, to help people stop being bosses out there, because God knows there are enough freaking bosses out there, right? We've all had them. It's time to get rid of them. They don't have a place in the world today. Share this episode with someone who you think could use this episode. Maybe they're starting out on their leadership journey. Maybe, you know what? They need a reminder of the foundations of leadership, such as we discussed there with Rich. Or heck, maybe they're just interested in the topic. Doesn't matter. I don't care. But you know what? Share this episode with somebody. And then finally, subscribe. Subscribe to this show so that you never miss an episode. And it doesn't matter what you use to listen to podcasts. iPhone, Android, pick an app. It doesn't matter. Just go to movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. And your player of choice will be there. That's it, folks. Again, you can reach the show notes at movingforwardleadership.com/85. as always, stop bossing and start leading. Take care now.